I had a pastor friend, mentor, years ago tell me that if I speak from my weaknesses as a pastor, if I will continue to speak from my weaknesses, then I will never run out of material. And I often reflect on that and remember that's very true, but I think as we are in part 2 of a teaching series called The Good Life, where we've been talking about the 7 deadly sins of suburbia, the 7 common temptations that we struggle with as Christians. If you're a person of faith or considering being a person of faith, these are some of the things that I think we can hang ourselves up on so easily and maybe not even realize it until the damage is already done. But it not just takes our life literally, but it actually will lead us away from God. It creates distance and disconnect in our relationship with our Heavenly Father. And so we're talking about those 7 sins. And as I've been thinking ahead and preparing even for this message, I just can't stop but thinking, man, this is all up in my business. This is all uncomfortable, and this isn't what I feel good about. And so I want you to know that I'm communicating today from a place of being a fellow struggler, if that's where you are. And we're going to talk about something that I think is probably relevant for every single one of us this morning. On Friday, I had somewhat of a comeback. I was sitting at my house, actually about to go sit down at my desk to prepare for this message a little bit more and just continue processing through things. And as I was walking to my office, I pulled my phone out, because this is what you do when you're walking from one place to another, kind of in the middle of something and transitioning to something else. I've opened up Facebook, and the first thing I see a post on the Fairfield Facebook page. It's the community that we live in. And this lady was asking if there was anyone interested in joining their co-ed softball team that evening. Exactly 55 minutes after when I was reading the message. So at 6 o'clock, I was just after 5. They were looking for 2 guys and a girl. It was a co-ed softball team. And immediately I thought to myself, oh, that sounds fun. And then I thought to myself, man, I don't know, that might not be fun. Like, I may not have what it takes. I haven't played softball, organized softball like that, in at least 15 years. So it's been a minute. And so I went back and forth 6 or 7 times, and finally I talked to my wife and my kids. They were all sitting there, and I told them, and I said, hey, what do y'all think? And my wife's like, go for it. That'd be awesome. We'll come watch. And I was like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. Braden, my oldest, he kind of was like, yeah, Dad, go for it. And I think he was kind of thinking, this will be fun. I'll enjoy this, because I sit on the sidelines and critique him all the time and his baseball and football and all the things my boys do. And then my youngest was like, no, Dad, don't. Please don't. Like, he knew it was going to go really bad. And so I did. I decided to go play. I told him I would show up, but it had been a minute, so I went and I quickly grabbed my cleats that were at least 17 years old, still in my closet, still in tip-top shape, Nike cleats, grabbed those, grabbed my glove, put on some shorts, put on my Hey Dudes, because I didn't want to wear my cleats while I was driving, and when I got there, I was going to change into them, and I headed to the softball field. I want to make sure I had time to stretch, because I was terrified I was going to pull a hammy or tear something. It was going to go bad. I was a little bit stressed out. I was a little bit anxious, but what I was probably most concerned about wasn't an injury or anything like that. It was more of like, am I going to live up to their expectations? Am I going to measure up? Am I going to embarrass my family? Because I already did that once last week. If you're at skate night, you know what I'm talking about. Your pastor may or may not have taken a spill trying to race the other dudes at skate night last week. But I started having this concern and this anxiety and this stress, because I started thinking about, what if I'm not good enough? And so I get there, the game starts. Well, right before the game starts, the guy looks at me and goes, hey, what position do you want to play? And I was like, man, I can play anywhere. I'm like, put me at catcher, because I think that's the least likely to make a mistake, but I didn't say that. He said, can you run? I was like, I think so. I used to. He's like, well, I'll put you in the outfield. He's like, can you track a fly ball? And I said, I used to, about 15 years ago. And he goes, I think you'll be fine. We'll hit you a couple before the game. And so then another guy walks up who's also going to jump on the team, and he was adamant he needed to play outfield. And so I wasn't going to be in the outfield anymore. I was like, oh, fantastic. And he goes, hey, I'm going to put you at shortstop. And I thought, oh, fantastic. This is going to go terrible. And so he did. Puts me at shortstop. My family wasn't there for the first inning. Sad thing about the first inning is, as I'm warming up, I'm stretching before the game actually starts, and I'm looking down at my shoes, and all of a sudden I realize my shoes are literally coming apart. They're 17 years old. I'm not exaggerating. That's not to say that I exaggerate all the other times. I'm not exaggerating, though. Like, literally stuff is falling off the top of my shoes, and so I did just that. I picked up my foot to, like, brush it off, and when I did, the sole of this shoe was, like, hanging on just at the toes. So, like, every time I'd walk, it's, like, clapping at me. Clapping for myself. So I was like, I call my family, I call Brandy and the boys, and they're already on their way. And I said, hey, can you bring some cleats? Bring Braden's cleats or bring my old football cleats. I just need some cleats. I said, hurry, the game's about to start. So they go back to the house. They don't get there in time. So I have to go to the plate in Hey Dudes and tall black socks And then I got to go out in the field, and I played one inning in Hey Dudes. It looked terrible. That is the reason I made an error, and that is the reason I have a huge bruise on my chest this morning. I took a line drive off the chest because I was a little rusty. It got better after that. I tell you all that because it's ridiculous, but I tell you all that because here's what's true about me. And I don't think I'm alone in this. If I am, don't tell me. I'm really competitive, even when my abilities don't match up with my competitiveness. But even more than that, it can lead me to some unhealthy places. It can lead me to have some really unhealthy thoughts because I want to be the best. I don't just want to be the best. If I'm being really honest, I want there to be times where people tell me that they think I'm the best, where people are willing to express how proud they are of me, whether it's somebody I know well or somebody I've never met. I can find myself in a place where I start to long for those kinds of things because I want to make sure that I'm measuring up, that I'm okay where I am with who I'm hanging out with what I have. And it's this pursuit I can find myself in that I think every single one of us can find ourselves in. Now, I know you're probably a lot more mature than I am, but I think all of us can understand when we find ourselves in a place in life where we begin to look around to the left and to the right, trying to figure out, how am I doing? Am I acceptable? Am I measuring up? Years ago, probably about the same time I bought those cleats, I heard a message from a pastor named Andy Stanley. He's at a church in Georgia. And I've never forgotten this illustration. I've heard other pastors use this illustration, but he talks about the land of Ur, E-R. And he says that we all want to add ER to the end of the adjectives that often are used to describe ourselves or that we want to describe ourselves. And so we want to be described as not rich, but richer, not smart, but smarter, taller, prettier, happier, rizzer, talenteder, more Instagram followers. Like we want more than what we have. We think we need more to feel better about ourselves. And then it gets even worse when we start dating someone or we're looking for someone to marry. We're not just thinking about those things for ourselves, but we start wanting those things for the person that we're in a relationship. We want them to be prettier. We want them to be smarter. We definitely want them to be richer. And so we start applying those things. We want people to measure up to that same standard, and it gets really dangerous. The flip side of that, we can also find ourselves in a place where we actually begin to think, I am richer. Or we look at someone else and we think, they are heavier, they are shorter, they are poorer, they are slower, they are nerdier. And either way, we can start to look around to our left and to our right, and it can lead us to a place where we feel superior over the people around us, or we can begin to feel inferior. And at the end of the day, I think what we'll find today is that it's not a good habit. And if there's one thing that's true about everything we're going to talk about today, this is definitely true. There is absolutely no win in comparison. We find ourselves captive to some imaginary standard of good enough that we'll never actually quite reach. And so what I want to do is I want us to understand a little bit more what this comparison is, where it comes from, what it looks like, so we can diagnose it in our own lives. But then I also want us to land in a place where we can understand what's the cure for that comparison. When we find ourselves in that comparison trap, how do we find ourselves out of that trap, find our way out of the trap? So what I want to do is, if you have your Bible, you can take it and you can turn to John chapter 20. We're going to land in John chapter 20 and 21, but we're going to start in Ecclesiastes. So go to John chapter 20, hold your place there, flip over to the book of Ecclesiastes. If you don't know where that's at, you can use your table of contents. There's no shame in that. Or you can just split the Bible in the middle. You'll probably land in Psalms. Go to the right from Psalms, Proverbs, and then you'll land in Ecclesiastes. Stall on a little bit so you can find yourself there. But Ecclesiastes is written by a guy named Solomon. Now, Solomon, if you know anything about the Bible, Solomon was the wisest man to ever live. He had a lot of influence, a lot of authority, a lot of responsibility. Probably not someone that you and I want to compare ourselves to. Like, he had more than we have. His wives were prettier than your wife, your girlfriend, and I can say that because he had plenty of them. He had 300 wives and 600 concubines, so he had a lot of responsibility. He was the wealthiest person in the world. There were kings and queens that would travel from all over to sit underneath the leadership of Solomon, to learn from him, to gain wisdom from him. So that's who's writing this, and we're going to pick up in Ecclesiastes 4, verse 4, and it says this. It says, I've never seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry between a person and his neighbor. This too is futility and striving after the wind. Here's what Solomon's saying. He's saying, I've been watching, and he uses the word rivalry. It's this picture of competition. two people or a group of people competing to try to get to the top, to top each other, to be better than the next, and looking to their right or left to see what everybody else is doing. Where is everybody else shopping? What is everybody else driving? Where does everybody else live? And he's saying, the result of this is they exhaust themselves, they work, they toil, they labor, they're driven by what they see and how they feel like they measure up to the people around them. It's fascinating to me that Solomon wrote this 3,000 years ago, and here we are in 2025, still dealing with comparison. Tim Keller talks about comparison. He's a pastor. He was a pastor for years in New York. He's passed away a couple of years ago. He put comparison into three different categories, and I think this helps us understand where maybe we might fall and where we may struggle the most with comparison. The first category is material composition. In other words, the things that I have or the things that other people have. Maybe an example of this is you see someone post a picture of their new car on Instagram, and you like your car until you see the picture of their car, and then all of a sudden you don't like your car quite as much. And you start looking at that car, and you start thinking, man, I think I need that car. I like that car. And you start to try to justify and convince your spouse that you need that car. And it's something you absolutely need to have in your life. Or maybe you see that post that she posted of the fresh brownies she made the other day that she wanted all the world to see. And you don't focus in on the brownies, but your attention goes to the kitchen, to the awesome countertops, to the new cabinets, to the double oven that is just immaculately clean. She's even got one of those perfect little word boards that's got a perfect quote or saying from Hobby Lobby on it. And everything just looks good, and you're like, I don't even like brownies anymore. And you just kind of get frustrated with it because you're looking at what somebody else has. Or somebody posts a picture of their tropical getaway. They spent maybe the last week at some tropical destination, and you see that, and you think to yourself, man, I wish I had the money to go on that kind of a trip. I can't even round up enough money to take my kids to Urban Air or Chuck E. Cheese. And you find yourself in a place where material comparison leaves us looking for security and satisfaction in what we have, the things we can hold on to. That's the first category. The second one is relational comparison. In other words, who is with me? Who are the people around me? Who am I spending my time with? This shows up when someone posts a picture and it's them and maybe another person or a couple of other people, and you're actually in the picture. The problem is the only part of you in the picture is your arm because they cropped you out. Or they all went and did something and you didn't get the invite, and so you're not even in the picture. And you begin to think to yourself, what did I do? Like, why didn't I get invited to be a part of this? And we start to think, do I not measure up? And am I not valuable enough to them? Or maybe you're single and another person close to you just got engaged. And that's frustrating to you because you want to be the one getting engaged. And so what begins to happen is you begin to let those thoughts turn in your head and process, and you begin to think things like, man, I'm prettier than she is. I make more money than she does. I have more to offer than she does. Like, why is God holding out on me? What is going on? And just a little side note, I want you to know, I think it's okay to grieve being single when you desire to be married. I think that's okay. I think where it goes sideways is when you begin to allow that grief to turn into envy that's fueled by comparison, and it leads you to those unhealthy thoughts and finding yourself in a place of self-pity and jealousy and insecurity. Maybe it shows up when you receive that Christmas card and you open up the envelope, and it's not just a card, but it's a letter, and it basically describes their entire year and how amazing their year was and how successful their spouse was and how great their kids are excelling in school. And then it's topped off with the perfect picture. Like, all the kids have matching sweaters. Even the dog's got a matching sweater. They're all smiling. They look like they like each other. And you think to yourself, man, there's no way I could get my kids to take that kind of a picture. Like, if that was a picture of my family, my kids would be punching each other in the throat. My husband would be rolling his eyes at me. The dog would be running all over the place. Like, I look around, and that's envy. That's comparison. Relational envy leaves us looking for that security, that satisfaction, feeling like we're enough when we factor in who is with us. And then lastly, the third thing is circumstantial comparison. In other words, where am I? This shows up when we begin to look at other people's lives, other people's situations and circumstances, and we begin to wish that what they have and what they're experiencing, I wish I could experience. I wish I could have those opportunities in my life. I wish my job had the same significance that his job has. I wish that my job had the same freedom that her job has. And we start to look at the opportunities and things that people are experiencing. Just a little personal insight into this. There are times where, because my job requires that I work on Sundays. That's like the main day of my responsibility and my role. And so what that means is I don't get a lot of weekends off. And I have to be careful sometimes because I'll get on Facebook or I'll get on Instagram and I'll start to see people that I know or people that I go to church with, and they're not at church because they're at the beach or they're at the lake or they're at the big resort in Cancun, or they're somewhere, but they're not at church. And then I begin to get into this place where I start to kind of feel pity for myself. I begin to think, don't worry about me. Well, I just show up every Sunday and serve God while you're off serving Satan or whoever else on your magical resort, wherever it is that you're spending your time. Like, have fun. I'm just going to be here serving the world, serving God without you. And I joke mostly, but do you see, and I think my point is, that's a little bit ridiculous, but when we find ourselves in that place of comparison, it leads us to some really irrational thoughts and things that we believe to be true that aren't true. Circumstantial comparison leaves us looking for that security, that satisfaction in where we are in life. And if it wasn't bad enough with just those things, take all three of those things and then throw social media into the mix. Like, really, let's understand this. I mean, this has been a problem since the beginning of humanity, but in the last 18, 20 years, social media has been like kerosene on a flame when we factor in comparison. Because what happens is we actually begin to look at the billboards of everybody else's life while we read the diary of our own life. We see the highlights from everybody else, and we know what the outtakes are in our life. We see the cropped version, the version with the filter on it. We see only what people want us to see. And the problem with that is, I'm not saying you need to go post everything that's awful and ugly and dysfunctional in your life. Nobody probably wants to see that either on a large scale. My point is when we begin to look at that and we begin to compare our lives to that, we're comparing our lives to a false reality. Because when we see the cropped version of someone's life, we don't see the cost that they had to pay to get to where they got, or to experience what they're experiencing, or to have the relationships that they had. It probably wasn't always good and amazing and awesome. Maybe you celebrated your anniversary. I've talked to a lot of people for some reason this week. Maybe I'm just aware of it because I know that our anniversary is coming up, but August seems to be an anniversary month. But maybe you celebrated your anniversary and you had a great evening celebration with your husband, and he brought home flowers, he cooked dinner, like it was a win. The next day, you get on social media and you see that your friend also had their anniversary, but they celebrated a little bit different than you did. They didn't celebrate it at home. They celebrated it by the husband giving his wife a golden doodle, a Louis Vuitton backpack, and then an all-expense paid trip to the Alps with the cast of Hamilton. Like, it was just this extravagant trip, and all of a sudden you look at your anniversary and you're like, man, my husband's a scrub. Like, what is up with this? And we begin to have these irrational thoughts based on a filtered presentation of other people's lives. And if that wasn't enough, in today's culture, when I was a kid, I think we could kind of guess. It was a little bit more subjective sometimes. I could guess, am I popular, am I not popular? I don't know, so-and-so says I am, so-and-so says I'm not. I don't know. Today, you can actually measure these things on likes and number of followers. And you begin to think to yourself, man, so-and-so got 300 likes, they got 400 follows, they got all this. Like, I got 24 likes on my last post, 11 the other day. My record's 40. And like, she posts a picture of her avocado toast and she has 400 likes. I don't understand. Like, what is going on? And we begin to think to ourselves, and we get to a place where we're having unhealthy thoughts about ourselves and about the world around us. And what Solomon is wanting us to see, that this is futility. This is unhealthy. This is destructive behavior. This is a bad way to live. There is no win in comparison. And he calls it futility and striving after the wind. Have you ever seen somebody chase the wind? I haven't. Maybe you have. But where my mind goes when I read this, and I've always thought this when I think about this verse, we have a dog, Trooper, the golden doodle. He's pretty worthless for anything but being friendly. He barks a lot, and he's just a friendly dog. But when he gets out of the shower, he does what most dogs do. He gets the zoomies, right? And you're like, man, we're talking about zoomies in church. Never pictured that would ever happen. But it's funny, when they get out of the shower, they get out of the bath, whatever, what do? They run around, they tuck their tail, they run around, they lose their minds, and it's hilarious because they run around and they're not even really thinking, and all of a sudden they stop. And they make that weird dog face. And I've always wondered, what is he thinking in that moment? Is he thinking to himself, did you see how fast I ran? That was amazing. I feel so good. Or is he thinking, I don't know why I just did that. I'm an idiot. Like, I don't know what he's thinking. I wish I could speak dog, but what was the point of that? It was meaningless. So when I think about living in the comparison trap, if we want to call it that, that's where my mind goes. I'm like the dog who runs around and then stops and realizes, why was I running around? I wasn't even chasing anything. And then what does the dog do? Most of the time, they do it, and then they stop, and they look, and what do? They do it again. And we can fall into the same cycle. Comparison is like that. There is never a sense of true satisfaction when we live in the cycle of comparison. Solomon continues on in verse 5. He says, the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. He's not saying don't be ambitious. I mean, this is Solomon. Have you seen his temple? Have you heard about his temple, the gardens? I mean, Solomon would be all about be the best you can be. So what is he saying? Well, he's helping us understand this in verse 6. One handful of rest is better than two fistful of labor and striving after the wind. He's saying it's better to have one hand open than to have two fists clenched, holding on to everything that you have, wishing that you had a third hand to hold on to more. But this is the life that we find ourselves living in. And when we find ourselves in that situation, we're wanting to hold on, but we're still looking around because it's not satisfying us. And so we continue to strive for more. Verse 7 says, then I looked again at futility under the sun. There was a man without a dependent, having neither a son nor a brother, yet there was no end to all his labor. There's this man who's been laboring, who's got two fists clenched, but he has no one to leave his inheritance to, no one to leave his stuff to. And even in that, he couldn't rest. He couldn't stop. He had to continue to labor. Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with riches. He's just working and working, working, never finding contentment, always more that he could have, always another goal to accomplish. It says, and he never asked, and for whom do I labor and deprive myself of pleasure? Why can't I stop and enjoy my life? Why am I like this? He's thinking to himself, why, what's this drive? Where is it coming from? And then he says this too is futility, and it is an unhappy task. Listen, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you have, what you accomplish, what your GPA is, how many promotions you get, how many trophies are on the shelf. None of that matters as long as we're focused on getting more of those things. It's a miserable business. It's a miserable life that we cannot win in. It's an unhappy task. Comparison surrounds us, and it's like a poison. We don't even really realize it's there. It's so subtle and slick, but it's incredibly dangerous. I think the Bible is pointing to something that's incredibly serious, and it's killing us. It'll lead us and disconnect us from God, from who God created us to be and the purpose and plans he has for our life. So what do we do? How do we cure? I think we can all see some of this in our lives and recognize some of these symptoms in ourselves, but what do we do with that? Well, I want to jump over to the New Testament, and there's something that Jesus says at the end of a sequence of events that take place with his disciples. And so we're going to pick up in the resurrection story, which is familiar. This is kind of the story everybody teaches from around Easter time, but there's something at the end of the resurrection story that I think gives us the cure for our comparison. So let's go to John chapter 20, starting in verse 2. Jesus has been crucified. He's been taken off the cross. He's been put in the tomb. And Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb early one morning before the sun comes up to visit the tomb. And she arrives and she finds out that Jesus is no longer there. He's risen from the grave. So this is where we pick up in verse 2. So she ran and came to Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved. We got to pause right there. She ran and she comes to Simon Peter and the other disciple. Who was the other disciple? It was John, who's also the author of the book of John. So John is writing about himself, and he describes himself as the other disciple whom Jesus loved. He wants to make sure that we all know, and that everybody that's ever read this book knows, that he is the disciple that Jesus loves. Seems a little arrogant. I don't know if you read it that way. That's the way that I read it. He says, they've taken the Lord, and said to them, they have taken the Lord from the tomb, and we do not know where they have put him. So Peter and the other disciple, just tell us who you are. Do you know anybody that talks in third person about themselves all the time? Isn't it so obnoxious and annoying? If that's you, I'm not cracking on you, but stop it. John's talking about himself, but he's talking about himself in third person. Why are you doing that? Stop it. So it says that they leave, and then notice, I want you to count how many times John takes a dig at Peter. for being slow. You ready? Let's continue reading. It says, the two were running together, and the other disciple ran ahead faster than Peter and came to the tomb first. Why does that matter? What's the point of that in the story? Remember how Solomon was talking about rivalry? Here it is. It shows up. And dudes, we are the worst about this. You take the simplest task that two men are responsible for, and they're going to turn it into a competition because one's got to be better than the other. That's exactly what's happening here. He says the other disciple ran ahead faster than Peter and came to the tomb first. So there's 2 times. And he stooped to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there. However, he did not go in because he's scared. That's probably what Peter would say. So Simon Peter also came following him. Just a reminder, I'm faster than Peter. And he entered the tomb, and he took the linen wrappings lying there, and the face cloth which had been on his head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but folded up in a place by itself. That's another miracle that's often missed in the resurrection story. A dude wrapped or completely folded up his garments and left them in place. That's a miracle. Verse 8. So the other disciple, who had first come to the tomb, also entered then, and he saw and believed. For they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead, so the disciples went away again to their own homes. Do you see what's unfolding here? I imagine that in this time of Peter and John's life, there was probably some resentment that Peter felt towards John. 1, he talked in third person all the time. 2, he always made it a point to throw a dig at Peter and to call him out. And honestly, as you read through some of the things that we read about Peter in the book of John, he kind of makes John seem like an arrogant goof. Like he just, it's kind of crazy. And we're going somewhere with this, but here's what's going on. Jesus is risen from the dead. The disciples don't fully understand all of that yet. They haven't seen Jesus yet. And what are they doing? They're back to doing what they did before they met Jesus. Why? Because it was easy and it was comfortable. It's what they knew how to do. It's what they felt confident. They were struggling in some of the chaos of the crucifixion. So we pick up in John chapter 21. And the last time we heard about Peter prior to this, what did he do? Jesus was arrested, and Peter, who would probably say he was one of the closest to Jesus, which is why John wants to make sure we know that he was the one that Jesus loved. What did he do? He denied Jesus 3 times. So Peter's dealing with some shame and some regret. So John chapter 21, starting in verse 4. They're fishing, but when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know it was Jesus. So Jesus said to them, "Children, you do not have any fish to eat, do you?" They answered him, "No." And he said to them, "Cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you will find the fish." So they cast it, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great quantity of fish. Therefore, here we go again. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." So when Simon Peter heard it, that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. Did you notice, even there, John wants to make it a point that he saw Jesus first. He realized that it was Jesus first. And then what does Peter do? He says, "You know what? You might be faster than me, but I can swim faster than you." He jumps out of the boat and he swims to the shore. And he goes on, he has a conversation with Jesus. Jesus asks him, "Do you love me?" Peter says, "Yes, you know I love you." They go back and forth 3 times. "Do you love me?" "Yes." "Do you love me?" "Yes." "Do you love me?" "Yes." And he says, "Go feed my sheep. Go feed my sheep." He's pointing him to a mission that he has for his life. But even in all this, you still see this rivalry, this competition going on between John and Peter. Continue on in verse 18. We skip down. Jesus is speaking to Peter directly. After he's kind of restored their relationship, he's redeemed what was wrong in that relationship. This is a picture of the gospel. And then in verse 18 it says, "Truly, truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to put on your belt and walk wherever you wanted. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will put your belt on you and bring you where you do not want to go." What Jesus is doing is he's actually foretelling the way that Peter is going to lose his life. He's going to be taken captive. He's going to be arrested. His arms are going to be stretched out. He's going to be put on a cross. He's going to be crucified. This is what he's telling Peter. Real encouraging news, right? Now he said this, indicating by what kind of death he would glorify God. That's important, glorify God. There's something going on here. We're going to circle back in just a moment. And when he had said this, he said to him, "Follow me." Hey, Peter, you're going to lose your life by trusting and following the life I've called you to live. Follow me. So Jesus shows up. He reminds Peter of who he is and what he's done for Peter, despite the failure, that he loves him, tells him what his life is going to be. And then look at Peter's response. Peter turned around and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. The one who, conveniently, John puts this in the book as well. The one, speaking about himself, who had also leaned back on his chest at the supper and said, Lord, who is the one who is betraying you? Like, what does that matter for this part of the story? Verse 21, so Peter, upon seeing him, said to Jesus, Lord, what about this man? So Jesus is talking to Peter. Peter, you're going to love me, you're going to lead for me, you're going to show the greatest courage for me by dying for me. And what does Peter do? He takes out his phone, he opens up Instagram, and he says, but hang on, Jesus, what about this dude? What about him? I know that's what you're saying about my life, but what about this guy? And Jesus probably rolls his eyes and says, Peter, put up your phone. Like, what does that even matter? Stop comparing yourself to John for just a moment. Put your phone while I'm talking. Put your phone away while I'm talking to you, anyways. And like I said, I imagine that Peter had some resentment in his relationship with John, but I think right here in this, and we might have already even missed it. But let's go back, because I think right here in this part of the story, we can find the cure for our comparison in the words that Jesus says, in his response to Peter. What he's saying, I have a plan. I have a purpose for your life. You have a divine calling and direction for your life, Peter. And the same is true for every single one of us. If you've placed your faith in Jesus, and you said, Jesus, I want to follow you, I want to trust you with my life, then your life has a purpose, a special divine calling on it. I mean, think about it. The happiest people in the world that I've run into oftentimes are the people who are not trying to pretend to be anyone other than who God created them to be. There's a contentment in that. What's the secret? Here's what I think the secret is. It's hard to be distracted by comparison when we're focused on our purpose. We're focused specifically on the divine purpose that God has for our lives. And I think it breaks down in two ways. The first way is this. And I think this is the first part of the cure for our comparison that we see in what Jesus says, is that we would recognize your universal purpose. Recognize your universal purpose. You go back to verse 19. What does Jesus tell Peter? He says, follow me. He tells him what's going to happen to him, and he says, follow me. Peter's like, okay, Jesus, but what about this guy? And then Jesus says to him, in verse 22, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Did you know in the book of John, Jesus' first words were follow me. Jesus' last words in the book of John were follow me. Powerful words, but they're not just words. They're words that point us to purpose. He's saying, follow me, become more like me. To be a follower of Jesus, to be a Christian, is to live in that kind of purpose every single day. I want to be more and more like Jesus. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, one of my favorite verses in the New Testament, says this, and I think it's because there's some competitiveness in the way that I think. Hebrews 12:1 says, therefore, since we also have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let's rid ourselves of every obstacle and sin which so easily entangles us. And then notice what it says, and let's run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking only at Jesus. Notice it doesn't say, look at Jesus while you're also paying attention to people around you. It says, hey, run with endurance the race that is set out before you, and look only at Jesus as you run that race. The originator and perfecter of the faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and he sat down at the right-hand throne of God. What is my point? My point is this true is for every single person who calls himself a follower of Jesus. Peter's purpose is your purpose. What is Jesus saying to Peter? Follow me. What does he say to us? Follow me. Keep your eyes on Jesus and run the race set before you. When was the last time you saw an Olympic runner run a race while staring at his competitor in the other lane? You don't see that because they can't run as fast, and they're going to get off track. They're going to fall down. They're going to be disqualified. They keep their eyes on the finish line. They fix their eyes there, and they run with focus, and they stay in their lane. Maybe you need to tap your neighbor and say, stay in your lane. This is kind of the point of what Jesus is saying. What's the lane? Look only at Jesus and follow him. You don't have to look to your right, to your left. You don't have to look over your shoulder. You just need to look at Jesus and follow him. Don't worry about what somebody else is doing in their lane. God has set your lane for you, so stay focused there. Peter, don't focus on what I'm calling John to do. What's that to you? That's the question he asked. What's that to you anyways? Just follow Jesus. This is the universal purpose for every single person who places their faith in Jesus. What's that to you? What's that to you that everything seems to always go that person's way? Just stay in your lane and follow Jesus. What's that to you that she can manage 6 kids and have a clean house and drink Starbucks daily and seems to always read a book every single week? What's that to you? Just stay in your lane and follow Jesus. What's that to you that he doesn't even have to study and seems to ace every single test and you can stay up all night long studying and struggle to even pass? What's that to you? Just stay in your lane and follow him. Peter, what's that to you that John has the big house, has a nice car, has a gorgeous wife, has 2.5 kids, a golden retriever, and a great job? What's that to you? Peter, stay in your lane and follow me. You see, I think this exposes something in us when we struggle to stay in our lane and really follow Jesus. You've heard me say it before, but the gospel message, the result of knowing Jesus and trusting Jesus and living for him, leads us to a place where we finally realize that Jesus plus nothing equals everything. The problem is we often we hear about Jesus and we want to follow Jesus and surrender our lives to him, but then we want to pile on things with that. Because we feel like, well, I need more. I need to measure up. How am I doing? Am I going to be okay? And the beauty of the gospel is that even without all the stuff, all the talents, all the approval, all the accomplishments, the good looks, the money, he still loves you anyways. And he still has a plan and a purpose for your life. I found this quote this week. Charles Spurgeon says, if you're not content with what you have now, you wouldn't be satisfied even if it were doubled, because you haven't yet realized that Jesus is all you need. Jesus is looking at Peter and he's saying, forget about John, just follow me. The same is true for us. That is our universal purpose. You go back and you read verse 18 where he says, truly, truly, I tell you, when you were younger, he's giving the direction for where Peter is going to go with his life. And I joked about it, but I think it shows us something here. Not only should we recognize our universal purpose, but we need to recognize our unique calling. Because every single one of us has a unique calling as we live under this greater purpose. Your unique calling is the specific way that God has called you to live on purpose in the places and the spaces and the opportunities that you have. He tells Peter, you're going to die a martyr's death. Like real discouraging news. Why did he have to tell Peter that? Because I think it gave Peter power when he realized what his calling was going to be. Because he had already denied Jesus in a critical moment. But in that next moment, when he was taken prisoner and he was arrested and he was hung on a cross, he asked to be hung upside down because he didn't feel like he was worthy to be crucified like his Savior was crucified. That's what church historians tell us. Why? Because God would be glorified in that. He needed that perspective. And I think knowing his specific calling is what empowered him to live that kind of life with boldness. I think he had boldness in his bones, at the core of who he was. I think this is all true for us. And so I wonder, as we reflect and we consider all that we've processed in the last few minutes, how would our perspectives change if we knew that what we're doing every day, no matter how it turned out from a worldly perspective, would all end in God's glory? For some, that might mean going overseas and being a missionary somewhere in some foreign country, speaking a language that you don't even know yet so that you can point people to Jesus. While for others, that might be a specific calling to a neighborhood and a place with people that you know and that you've invested time in those relationships and you don't even see God working yet in those relationships, but there's a calling there on your life. Maybe it's as a parent, maybe it's as an employer, as an employee, but every single one of us have a specific, unique calling on our life. And as we stay focused on that, staying in our lane, following Jesus, I don't think there's any room for comparison to take hold in our lives. If you are somewhere, wherever you are, wherever you spend your time, I believe God has called you there on purpose. God doesn't make accidents. He's appointed you for that time and place. When we started Church Story, one of the things we talked about a lot is how can we help one another really know who we are and who God has shaped us to be so that we can really make a difference in the world around us. Because I think as you reflect on the things that Jesus said are the two most important commands, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then the second one, he says, love your neighbor as yourself. We know those, and maybe those are familiar, but oftentimes when we think about loving our neighbor, we stop at love our neighbor, and we leave off the as yourself. The problem is when we struggle to realize our own value, our own worth, that doesn't come from anything we do, but because of everything Jesus did, then we start to love our neighbor with strings attached so that we'll feel loved. That's not love. So as we understand who he has designed and created us to be, there is no one like you. There is no one in this world that has the story that you have, that has the abilities and the gifts that you have, and the personality that you have to go and make a difference in the way that God has specifically called you. There is no one that can step into your calling. When we fail to step into our calling and our purpose, when we fail to do that, the world is missing out. And so I want us to feel that responsibility today, because I think there's something life-giving there. Because where we can often find ourselves is we can find ourselves in a place where we're living with performance anxiety, and we're working, and we find ourselves hurting in ways that we don't actually have to hurt because we continue to put ourselves in positions that we weren't built to live in. And so when we do this, we start to think there's something more I've got to do, but the reality is that there's a purpose for your life and there's a calling on your life. So what do you need to do? That's what you need to do. Just live in that purpose. Live in that calling. We're not called to impress. And even if we were, how would we know how to impress? The standard seems to change every single day. And yet we'll exhaust ourselves trying to measure up, all while we're losing joy, we're losing contentment, we're losing relationships, we're losing opportunities. Did you know that even Jesus couldn't please everybody? And he was sinless. And there were still people that didn't like Jesus, but yet we'll exhaust ourselves thinking that we can please everyone. The pressure to be special, unique, seen, proven. There's no pressure because you already are because of what Jesus did. And here's my point in saying all of that. It's very different to live with purpose than to live to prove. And oftentimes we live to prove, missing out on our purpose, missing out on what God has called us to do. And the result of that is your purpose and your calling dies in a place of your insecurity. And so wherever God has placed you, wherever he has put you, live on purpose, stay in your lane and follow him. It's not just anything. He specifically called you there. You're not just a teacher. You're God's representative in the classroom to show people how Jesus would teach the Pythagorean theorem. Like you get to live out the life that Jesus would live. If you're a student, you're not just a student, you're God's representative on your school campus or your university campus to show people what it looks like, what Jesus would look like, studying hard and showing up on time to class. We are representatives of Christ. If you're a nurse, then you're God's representative in the medical field to show people what it looks like when Jesus would care for someone. If you're a barista at Starbucks, you are God's representative in the coffee world so that they can know what it looks like when Jesus serves a grande triple caramel macchiato light whip with almond milk. Like, live out the life he's called you to live in the specific ways he's called you to live with purpose, not pointing to ourselves, but pointing to our Savior. And so where does this land us? I think we can all find ourselves in a place of insecurity or jealousy or pride that comes from comparison. And I think it forces us to ask some questions. Some questions like, what am I looking to for approval? Who am I looking for to tell me that I'm okay, that I'm safe, that I'm secure? Is it my parents? Is it my spouse? Is it a friend down the street? Is it someone I've known for a long time? Is it a sibling? If it's anyone other than your Heavenly Father, then that might be an unhealthy thought process that's going on in our minds. Constantly consumed with how I look. Am I good at something? Consumed with my Instagram influence. Until we recognize those things and we address those things, then our life will continue to be distracted by it and we'll miss out on our purpose and our calling.